Okay, so we're back with another episode of Flashbang Realities. We got a new guest this week, so why not? How about you do a little introduction for yourself?
Yeah, I'll do like a 30-second little elevator pitch, I guess. I was a journalist. I was a coach. I was a player. I was an analyst. I still am technically a coach. I'm primarily right now working on content, but for the most part, commentary is where I do my best thing. So if you're ever looking for a commentator, hit my line. Other than that, I could do pretty much anything else, just not as good.
I mean, fair enough. It's good to be multi-talented, because I certainly am fucking not. But anyway, so the streets tell me that you're a bit of an expert on roster moves that didn't happen.
Yes.
Are the streets correct?
The streets are correct, and I don't want to alarm anybody, and I also don't want anybody jumping on my shtick right now. So what I will say is that I have 33 pages of sources and roster moves that have been collected over the course of the last, 9 years that span as far back as, 11. So back off, everybody. They're coming soon. The videos are on the way. It's going to be fun.
Well, in that case, how about we do a little teaser, and we'll talk about one of them today, because there's one in particular that is probably would still be, in my opinion, the biggest roster move of all time. So let's go back a few years. I believe 2018 to be exact, and let's paint the picture. So SK Gaming, rumoured to soon be joining Immortals to play under MIBR at the time. They weren't quite as good as they used to be, but they were still pretty good. You know, Fallen, Coldzera,
right,
sort of Taco, whoever else was playing in the spot that just got the shit for their entire duration that they were on the team. And they were thinking of going international. And they tried a few people. They looked at Shocks, they looked at Nico and Rain, Crims, and apparently even JW. But eventually it seemed that they settled on two people in particular. s1mple, and on s1mple's recommendation, flamie. Now, flamie was so excited about the move that he was apparently willing to pay part of his own buyout and had even bought his plane ticket. But then at the last minute, s1mple just decided no. He just decided that he didn't like being in NA the first time around with Liquid, and the language barrier would perhaps be too much. He also hadn't achieved much with Na'Vi yet. They hadn't yet won a major. It would still take a few years to do that. And so they stayed on Na'Vi, and in the end, SK signed Stewie, and they would then go on to sign Tariq, and that lineup just never really did much. And after Stewie left, joined Liquid, did a load. Tariq joined either NRG or EG, whichever one came first. No one really cares, it's the same thing. He did some good stuff and all. And eventually MIBR, they just disbanded because of a ton of things that the team didn't agree with. So, the question is, what if s1mple and flamie had joined SK? And so this is the point where I turn to you, why not? Because undoubtedly, even with FaZe being the super team of the year before, it feels like this super team would have surpassed that one, just in terms of the names. You've got two-time player of the year, Coldzera. You've got the new guaranteed player of the year, s1mple. So how good do you think they would have been?
Yeah, I mean, before I get into that directly, before I answer your question head on, I just want to kind of note the fact that this was the time period and where they had picked up Electronic over Edward. This was about 6 months into that where these rumors started to arise, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less. But even still, Electronic was effectively a godsend to them. I mean, he was very, very clearly by far and away their best individual mechanical rifler with s1mple on the op, right? So I think it was interesting to even hear that he was willing to part ways with Electronic at that point in time, as well as the fact that he wasn't willing to try and make it work. Obviously, they ended up doing that anyway, right? But just the idea at the time that he wasn't really sold on that was very interesting to me. And flamie, I mean, while not bad by any means, clearly was the player that he needed to make an international move work, right? He felt that was the thing that would make him most comfortable, I figure. And that's something that I completely understand. Now, how good would they be? The question is, was flamie really petering off at that point in his career where even making a language barrier jump would have been too much for him to handle? I think possibly. I think flamie might have been a little bit stunted in that regard because he never went international, right? He never made that leap, even after Na'Vi, right? So I personally don't know if Flamie would have been very good, but I do know that mechanically speaking, s1mple going into that year, as towards the end of the year as well, was very, very clearly ready for any team as far as being able to shoot was concerned. That was never a question. And I think that with Fallen, either on the AWP or off the AWP is something that you wanted to highlight a little bit, because that's where I don't really know what would have been. And I want to know what your thoughts are on whether or not you thought he would have given it up for s1mple at that point.
So I don't know. I really don't know, because Fallen, you know, he was still at a very competent level on the AWP at this point. Obviously, he tailed off in the years after that, but I believe he was, I just saw it there, 6th in the world in 2017. Like, that is good, respectable numbers. So, and for audio listeners, it's 1.13 rating in 2017 as an AWP IGL, which is undeniably good. But I actually feel, and we'll talk about this a little more in a little bit, but I kind of feel like the success of the team hinges on s1mple being the AWPer over Fallen. I don't see a world where, even as exceptional as we knew s1mple was on a rifle, I don't see a world where this team actually succeeds with Fallen still AWPing. But then that also opens up, you know, more difficulties in terms of, was Fallen really ready at that point to become the IGL we know him to be in late 2025, early 2026?
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that if you look to Fallen statistics for the time period and where this move was happening, it was at the beginning of the year. It was from January to about April, I believe, where that move would have actually transpired, where s1mple would have joined. And I think Fallen was in a pretty damn good spot right then and there. I think that as an AWP player, he was a little more than competent at that point, especially on the IGL role, where I don't really know what would have happened. Don't even worry about it if you have to do it like that. I can give you the numbers if you want. On LAN against top 30, he was a 1.11, and that was against all levels, against top 5 to top 50, if you want to put it in that scope. It was a 1.09 against top 10 or top 5 teams. So like, that's in and of itself more than fine for an AWP, right? So I wouldn't have been shocked if s1mple was willing to give it up at that point, just based on, you know, the reputation that the 2-time major winners hold at that rate, right? Where he's like, okay, I'll join, but can I op? And Fallen's like, no. And he's like, all right. And, you know, maybe that played into it a little bit. Who knows? Maybe at the end of the day, he wasn't really ready to relinquish the AWP, and that played into his thought process at that point in time. You maybe think that might be something?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it would have been as big as the whole, like, wanting to win with Na'Vi and the language differences he was concerned about. But what I will say is that, you know, it took s1mple another, I think, full year to drop the AWP for Guardian, which was someone that, and I'm not saying he doesn't have respect for Fallen, but someone he had, like, an extreme amount of respect for.
That's true. He did do that again. I forgot he did it twice.
Yeah, because of, you know, like, earlier on in his career and earlier on in Guardian's career, because as we all know, that move for Guardian was, it was not good.
Yeah,
Guardian
unfortunately.
on Na'Vi in 2019 was not good. So maybe he wouldn't have been ready in 2018. Maybe there was that part of s1mple's ego that was like, I'm going to be the best player in the world as an AWPer. But I think on that, the cultural and language differences are the things I'm more concerned about, because, and I always use these guys as a great example when talking about current BC game, which ironically is also a s1mple team, is when Vitality first went international, right? It was Zonic as the coach, Dupree and Magisk, and Misuta, Apex, and Zywoo, obviously. And after Misuta was cut and Spinks was brought in, one of the things that the players all spoke about and Zonic spoke about was that the team was never really going to function as they wanted it to while it was a Danish and French split, because it was 2 separate teams that were being brought together to play Counter-Strike. They needed that third cultural element, which ended up being a bridge. Yeah, that kind of bridge where it's like, okay, we're not 3-3 or 2-3 if you want to just call it the players. We are, you know, 2-2-1, and that's also a concern that I have for BC game now, and it's a concern that I would have for this team, especially because I have no concept of what Flamie's English was even like, really. And also what the Brazilians' English was like at the time. I mean, I assume Fallen's was good back then. I mean, I met Fallen in September of that year and had a little conversation with him, so I assume he didn't magically get better in 6 months. But as for Fur and coldzera, I don't know. So I just feel like the cultural and language differences might have been too much for this team to ever properly gel.
Yeah. I think like not only one of the highest potential teams to succeed, I guess, but the gap between the potential to succeed and the potential floor, I think, is probably the real gap that we need to be looking at too, right? Because this did have the potential to be an outright dud, in my opinion. I think that there was a world where they get practically just about as much as they get done with Tarek and Stewie, except they probably come out with like maybe a couple honeymoon wins out more than the others. Maybe even they come away with like a crazy major in the very beginning and peter off almost immediately following as they get adapted to, right? Like, I think the chances of them having a long-term success was almost like asking inevitably for there to be that roster change to split the difference in the team, like you're saying, right?
Yeah, and I do agree with you there. I think because the Tarek and Stewie roster really did just achieve nothing. Like, yeah, they were getting some deep runs, but when you look at what SK were the year before and the year before that as SK or LG, like, it was the start of a very long fall off for all of the players involved. Well, the Brazilian players involved, at least. And
yeah.
I feel like, yes, you maybe would have had that honeymoon thing where no one knows what to expect and they just come in. They've still got coldzera at the closest to his peak level. They've got Fur, who I think is one of the most underrated players in history. Flamie, he's a player. I never really liked Flamie, honestly. But obviously s1mple as well, like, was becoming the god version of s1mple, that I find it hard to believe that they wouldn't have won a trophy. I really do find it hard to believe that they wouldn't have won. And, like, a real trophy as well. But like you say, like, the longevity culturally, because I also don't believe that this is a team that would make a change to fix cultural issues. I think, they wouldn't do what Vitality did. If it wasn't working culturally, the lineup would just be blown up and they'd just go full Brazilian again.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just really quickly, it's also interesting at the time when we're talking about the fact that Tarek and Stewie roster never really did anything, so to speak. I think it would be a little bit disingenuous to not mention the fact that towards the end, when they were given, ample amount of time to have both Stewie and Tarek in the team, as well as getting good lands under their belts, like, they became a team that was contending to be a dark horse in almost every event, it felt like, at a certain stage, like top fours, second place finishes, beating teams on these lower tier lands and finding first place trophies against albeit rosters that they should be beating every day of the week in general, regardless, right? But imagine they gave s1mple and flamie that same amount of time, and not only that, but the players themselves gave themselves that amount of time as well. Could that have been a little bit better? I would say yes. And again, it just really matters as to, in reflection from the players themselves, how much they would have been willing to dedicate in terms of time without making a roster change. And that, I guess, we can really never know, obviously. So,
yeah, and that's my thinking as well, is because I think as well, like, the Stewie and Tarek roster didn't really have that long together. I mean, Stewie was on Liquid by the end of the year, and Taco was brought back. So it's just,
how many lands did Tarek have with MIBR, if we can get that scene, because I don't know what the timeline for him joining was, but I'm pretty sure that he had like half the year about, if I'm not mistaken. I think he had about half the year, and if you're giving this team 6 months with s1mple and flamie too, like, if they're willing to go that full 6 months, dude, I mean, gloves are off. It could be anything, right? Like,
yeah, and you are right. Like, they were making a lot of deep runs. Like, you can't take it away from them that they were a good team.
Yeah, about half a year.
But I do think that there is something to be said that I think Stewie and Tarek, and obviously, like, Americans and Brazilians are still culturally very different, but I think that's culturally a lot closer than Eastern Europeans and Brazilians, and I think that would have been. I think it would have been harder, and like you said earlier, with the gap between success and dud, is I think a lot larger with s1mple and flamie than it was with, and actually I think it's a lot larger with s1mple and flamie than a lot of the other options, which again we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah.
Than perhaps anyone else they could have brought in. Like I just think the actual chance where it just doesn't work, where you can just see like the system isn't clicking and they can't communicate with each other properly, and like, you know, the people who were working at the events kind of, they're whispering behind the scenes like, oh, they don't really seem like a team, which is something that you can't help but notice when you're at these events. There's so many times where you can see a team, it's like, this team is so close to fucking dying. They are so genuinely close to making a change, and it's always so obvious and so correct when it's about to happen. And I really do just think, like, I don't know, I really think with this team it's so hard to say, because there's such a large chance that the skill just pushes them through it all. But I do think it would have been a very hard burn that fizzled out quite quickly.
And we're kind of talking about, obviously, the elephant in the room being s1mple versus Fallen AWP conversation, but I think there's also a conversation to be brought up about what flamie would have been doing in that team and how things would have shifted for him, if at all. Like, obviously, if s1mple is going to be the primary opper and Fallen's going to be in-game leading, is he taking on more anchor responsibilities? Is he going to be playing more entry roles on T side? Is flamie going to be playing in the pack with him? Because I think, personally, in my mind, if you're bringing in two, you know, non-native English speakers into a non-native English speaking team, and you're separating them for a majority of their plays, it doesn't really spell out an easy way of forming a line of communication to where that comfortability that we were talking about before for s1mple is actually apparent and readily available to him in the server, right? You know, you'll find times where now a s1mple and electronic have a decent amount of plays that are being made with those guys relatively close to one another, especially on CT sides. And when you flip things around onto T sides and s1mple is opping and flamie is playing like a full-on entry role, right? Like, the communication pathway has practically a world in between them a lot of that time, right? So, again, maybe that isn't a problem inherently, but, you know, if s1mple and flamie are both rifling together, I think it becomes considerably more easy to see a world where they would actually be linked up more often. Whereas, you know, electronic and flamie are two pretty different players in that regard. I think, positionally speaking, electronic and flamie, clearly electronic of the two of them, would be a little bit more linked up with s1mple in many instances where he can play more supportively in that.
Yeah, for sure. I actually 100% agree on that. And I think we should circle back to that in a minute, because
sure,
I first want to ask, if this team was to succeed, right? This is obviously the year that Astralis signed Magisk and began their era, and they also revolutionized the game. And I think, especially if you focus on that idea of just how much Astralis changed the meta of Counter-Strike in 2018, do you think that this team would have risen to that level where they, you know, adapted to the Astralis meta quickly? And do you think they would have actually been able to prevent Astralis from establishing their true era?
So, if we are going to be going based off what Astralis had accomplished in that year, as well as the teams that they had played, if you go back and you look at it, I would say almost half, if not more, of the teams that Astralis faced on land that year ended out in the finals with them beating one of MIBR or Na'Vi. Funny enough, or rather, not even necessarily beating them, but win or lose. If they were being bumped from tournaments, it was one of the two of those teams, and if they were winning tournaments, it feels like it was one of the two of those teams, right? And winning record over the both of them, but the team that was able to, at the very least, knock them down a peg even one time was Na'Vi with s1mple and flamie, right? I don't believe there was a time on land that they were bumped outright from a tournament, this Prime Astralis roster, that is, by MIBR. Na'Vi did it, MIBR didn't. So to say that the two players that in that game in particular were like front runners in being able to do so, like in my opinion, personally, thinking back, it was ESL1 Cologne 2018. I think that s1mple and electronic were those two guys, and I think flamie was practically nowhere to be seen. So if we're talking about him being a piece brought over into uncomfortable territories again, tapering off towards the ends of that year a little bit, I think that it's just, for me personally, in my mind, I can't really imagine a world where there's just so much change so soon that I can see them even having like a touch onto Astralis if it isn't during a honeymoon period, if it isn't during a series where, Astralis don't really know what the hell is going on or who the hell is going to peak them or what the play is going to be from that side that doesn't even really know themselves, right? So I guess to answer your question in short, after doing like that big spiel, I would say no. I would say predominantly I don't imagine there being a world that would be a team that would be able to take them, where Na'Vi and MIBR were only like just barely able to take them the distance in some series, and that's putting it like kind of comfortably when they're usually not winning or rather losing by a very small margin. It's pretty decent typically on the maps they lose. I don't foresee a world where they would be able to get themselves into high gear quick enough to be any better than either Na'Vi or MIBR at the end of the year, in that regard, personally.
Yeah, I think what you said there about like a honeymoon period where they don't know who's going to peak them is kind of the only way as well. Because the thing with Astralis, obviously, that was...
Their double up setup would be mean as hell, though, in hindsight.
The double up would catch them off for
I didn't think about that.
But the thing that... One of the things
Maybe
that made Astralis so special was just their preparation. And
yeah.
Do you remember that that whole... like explain the frag series that like Betway used to do with like Rob 4 as the host, and he'd just be there with an iPad. Do you remember that?
I think I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah. So I remember I remember watching those, and I remember seeing two on the same day. One was nifty, and he was just like explaining his plays. So he's like, a lot of that is luck. I just peaked him. Like I'm just killing him. Like I'm just frying that round. And the other one's Device, and it's like, well, on page 762 of my strat book, I knew that they would all be in this position, and I just killed them one by one. And you could see this throughout all the Astralis games, where star players' ratings suffered so much against Astralis because they became so good at just strangling star players. I mean, you can see it here. s1mple in the Face It Major final is the second lowest rated player on the server.
And Glaive is the highest.
Yeah. So it's like, I think the only thing that I can really think in the long run would have saved this SK/MIBR team would have been the fact that they had s1mple and coldzera. And if all your resources is going into stopping one of them, you might not be able to stop the other. But there is... Go on, sorry.
No, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to like compare the pieces to the point where I could say one would be inherently better than the other. Like, I mean, I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth. I'm going to just say this outright because this is just what has been said. s1mple has already outwardly named Zeus as the best in-game leader that he's ever played with. And he's played with, although for maybe not very long of a time, Kerrigan, Alexi B, Snappy, right? So, like, I'm trying to, like, imagine where Fallen at that time period would rank as an in-game leader, because I think he could definitely rival that. But the amount that Zeus would be able to get out of a player like s1mple, with, again, no language barrier whatsoever, I feel like would be at least better than Fallen's. Like, what Zeus should have been able to get out of him, with him saying that he's the best in-game leader that he's ever played with to this day. I don't really know. The firepower would have had to have been the super team thing that makes every other super team look stupid and win nothing in the grand scheme of what they're actually aiming to do, is what I'm thinking right now. When you were saying before, right, this rivals like the FaZe super team that didn't win a major, when this rivals the, I mean, it's obviously not the same concept, but like the G2 French super team, quote unquote, they put together that didn't win a damn thing outside of like a pro league and maybe a DreamHack. Like, I don't know. Sorry, that was just a little aside thing, but...
No, I think
the firepower would have had to have been so stupid to make this work long term, and I just don't think it's foreseeable in the long term for them to have done it. And I guess that's why they backed out. I think that there was a reason why s1mple maybe thought that might not have been the best move.
No, I agree. I think firepower could have seen them inconsistently beat Astralis more consistently than any other team could, if that makes sense. But I don't think firepower would have been enough, as we've seen with other super teams, like you said, for them to have consistently been winning tournaments like a team like this.
Let's just say there's another pair of players in this list that I think is easily the better choice when we get to that. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I agree, and I have a feeling we're going to say the same one. But the last thing I want to say before we have a quick ad break is, if this had happened, what the fuck would Na'Vi have done? Was there anything ever said about what Na'Vi would have done?
Yes, actually, there was.
Was there?
And I'll tell you after the ad read if you wanna stick around to find out.
Yeah, we'll do it. Oh, that was good. I like that. Charlie, run the fucking ad break, brother. So, Jack, do you find it hard to keep up with all the news in Counter-Strike?
I do. I took a weekend off and I came back to 6 new IGLs, 3 retirements, and apparently Navi's Waterboy got picked up by a top 20 team.
Right. That's why I've been relying on the TLDR newsletter. It's a bi-weekly email that keeps you up to speed on everything in the CS scene, without needing to scroll Reddit for 3 hours while questioning your life choices.
Yeah, it's like if HLTV had a baby with your funniest friend who actually watches every game. You get quick hits of news, spicy roster moves, upcoming match schedules, and even some insider gossip. All killer, no filler.
And let's be honest, some of these tournament formats, you need a guide just to figure out who's playing who. TLDR breaks it all down, so you actually know what the hell's going on.
Plus, it's funny. Like, actually funny. It's like reading a group chat between smart CS fans who roast everything in sight, but still care deeply about the game.
So if your brain's full, but your heart still beats for Counter-Strike, do yourself a favour. Sign up for the TLDR newsletter. It's free, fast, and guaranteed to make you smarter. Or at least sound smarter in Twitch chat.
Check out the link down below and subscribe, because the only thing more tragic than missing a major upset is not even knowing it happened.
TLDR. You don't have time to read everything, but you still want to sound like you did. Okay, so we've had the lovely ad break that is just me and Jack chatting shit about the shit TLDR. No, it's really good, actually. It's a really good TLDR newsletter, and if you're not already subscribed to it, go fuck yourself. And also subscribe. Do it at the same time. We've even got a magazine you could fuck yourself with. No, okay. Why not? Tell me, who would Na'Vi have signed?
Yes. So, at that point in time, I actually wrote this in my script for the video that I'm writing, like literally a week ago, probably. So it's fresh on my mind. There was an organization that was owned, renewed by Zeus at the time by the name of Pro 100. And it was kind of acting as almost an academy team for him in some sort of sense of a way, where he could pretty reliably reach out to those players if he really wanted to, and get them promoted in some capacity. So at that point in time, there were two players who were really individually sprouting at that moment, and it felt like that they looked like that they were ready to make a jump somewhere. I don't think it would have been Na'Vi, but, you know, rumors, I guess, pretty strong ones at that, by the horse's mouth of Flaric and Avian, it would have been joining the team from tests and tryouts that they were doing at the time. They knew that they were being, moved onto that roster. s1mple and flamie had already pretty much told the team ahead of time that there was at least a conversation on the table about it. Na'Vi were testing players, and they were pretty ready to sign Flaric and Avian, but it never really came down to that. And the players were pretty bummed about it, and you can imagine that being, proposed into the biggest organization that I think either of those two would have ever been in their lives, to this day, is a pretty big bummer, as players at the very least. I think that the biggest that they were on as players by that point was Hellraisers together. So yeah, that's definitely a toughie to be left out from.
Yeah, no, I didn't realize that, and yeah, I mean, these players really didn't amount to much, did they?
Unfortunately not, and they were young at that point too. I mean, you got to think about it. It was 8 years ago or so. Like they were like 20, 21. Like they were just getting their sea legs, right? So imagine they got that chance to play under like a Zeus. That'd be pretty crazy.
Because this is the thing as well. It's like Pro 100. They weren't a great team, but they weren't exactly a bad team. Like they weren't terrible.
They were like a modern day academy team, like that's kind of where they floated around.
And these are the type of numbers, looking at these two players, that actually, like, you can make a step up from this. Like, maybe not as much with this Avian guy.
However you want to say it, man.
As this Flaric, because I think, 1.13 lower down with a sniper means less than 1.12 lower down with a rifle. But it's kind of interesting that Na'Vi were willing to do something like this, because that also suggests that Na'Vi were willing to take a very big hit on their initial performance to actually grow as a team steadily over time. Because there's
kind
no
of
way
shocking,
they
to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, it is, absolutely. Because I think, if I remember right, Na'Vi made like the playoffs of every major up until Paris. And they almost certainly wouldn't have done that with this team. I don't see a world where this team, like Zeus, Electronic, Edward, Avon, and Flarich, is in the Face It major final. Let's put it that way. I mean, maybe they make the playoffs because, that playoffs had big and complexity, but they ain't.
And the weird thing about that is that, like, up until that point, and even, like, I would say for the next, like, 2 years after, like, Na'Vi got every player, it felt like, that they approached first. Like, they never really felt like they had a lack of pull when it came to things of that nature. So I do wonder if it came down to the fact that their pull was kind of drained at the fact that flamie and s1mple were gone. Maybe there weren't enough options at the time that they felt like were going to be either good enough individually with experience. Like, obviously they have a wealth of experience already in Edward and Zeus, where they're like, we don't want to pick up these guys that are like 27, 28 years old pushing that or anything of that nature. And they didn't really feel like doing a whole lot of digging beyond a very readily available two players to them, as well as probably very financially wise to them at that point, with Zeus having direct ties to the organization, right? So also probably just the fact that Zeus would be a little bit more comfortable with players he's familiar with in some way. I mean, it makes sense, but it's not. It doesn't make sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I also think maybe there's the aspect of it where the Russian-speaking scene wasn't quite as strong. Like, I know Gambit had won.
Dude, if he could have stolen Hobbit, that shit would have gone crazy.
Yeah. Like, Hobbit is kind of really the only obvious one there. I mean, like, you look at Hellraisers.
I mean, you'd have to take Mo with him if you were doing a double move, and I'm okay on that.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Hellraisers, you're not going to take anyone from there. Like, Dead Fox.
Woxic, I guess. But Woxic was opping at that point.
That would also speak Russian. But that would also mean, going international far earlier, which I don't think Na'Vi would have done. It also took them a lot longer than that to be willing to give up their Ukrainian flag. I'm not sure they'd have done that back then. So there's a number of things. I mean, JR was an AWP IGL. Like, again, like, not sure that's the move they would have made. Yeah. Not really sure.
I think it was kind of chalked. I actually think low-key that might have been their best move in hindsight.
Yeah. I mean, these
avant-garde guys weren't really names that people were all that familiar with at that point in time. They only just really started getting any major notoriety that year, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, and
major notoriety. I'm not trying to downplay them.
The Spirit lineup there also isn't very exciting. But anyway, let's circle back to SK. So we kind of spoke earlier about which one would be AWPing. So let's definitively decide which one would be AWPing, because there are a lot of players mentioned. JW is another one. But JW also was willing to rifle.
Correct.
He was willing to do that, and s1mple at points was willing to rifle. Meaning they could have both been willing to rifle, and I think, based on the fact that everyone else that they looked at was a rifler, that maybe that was the condition. So, on that basis, shall we, for the rest of this what if, lock in the idea that Fallen would have remained on the AWP?
I think so. I'm pretty cool on that, I think.
Okay. So, Fallen's AWPing.
Yeah.
In that case, how would the riflers set up? Like, actually, what in your mind does the system look like? Because I was trying to think about this, and I can't see where there's space for everyone.
Yeah, see, so, I mean, if we're going to be operating on, like, all of the names that we're going to be laying out, maybe we can just start by breaking them down here, if that's okay. Like, each and every one of those pairs that they would have brought. Because that's really where we can get our answer, in my opinion, by laying out each of the names and pairings that they were saying, right?
Okay. Yeah. So you think that they were always looking to fill, like, kind of these are the two roles we're going to fill, and whoever we sign is going to fit into them.
I think so, and I can kind of explain myself as to why for most of them, but I think the most perplexing one is going to be what was, I believe, their initial move, which was Nico and Shocks. That one is the most interesting to me, only because I think it was quite clear after a certain point with Shocks that his roles were just like flexing around to a point where like nobody really knew whether or not he was going to remain an aggressive player or fall into passivity. And when it came time to later in his career go back to something a little bit more aggressive, it just didn't work, right? So I think that the model was always going to be that they were going to find one of their players to be an aggressive entry rifle. And the other player would just be their closer many a time, if not a lurker out on their own island, able to do something on their own whilst everything else is functioning around them. And I think that if you look particularly at Nico and Rain, that one makes like the most sense to me. Like that one is the most role for role I feel like I could imagine, where there's some space for Nico by virtue of Rain just kind of throwing his body on the line. But the only thing comes into play for me there is Fur. I think Fur is kind of the outlier when you have players like Nico, Cold, and Rain, because he's going to need to be a little bit less, not predictable, but a little bit less passive and lurky than he would be traditionally used to in order for that to work a little bit better. Otherwise, it's just Rain and Nico as number 1 and number 2 in, which isn't inherently bad in my opinion.
No, I agree. I actually think that would have been quite good. And I think that then, you know, it transfers over to flamie and s1mple nicely,
Yes.
where you see that, well, flamie would go into the Rain spots because he's just not as good, and s1mple would be this big rifling star.
I think Rain would have to anchor at that point. Like Crims would be anchoring for his duo, and then flamie would be anchoring for his duo, assuming Fallen is ulping. So the one that confuses me a little bit is, I guess, primarily the Crims in existence with Cold Zera. I think that's a little bit of a crossing of the wires.
That one is strange.
And then, like I said, Rain, Nico, and Fur. Those are like the pairings that I'm kind of like, what's going on and who's giving up more?
Yeah, no, I agree. And just again with like the flamie and s1mple one especially, is like, I don't think in the other teams, the other suggestions, there's people giving up quite as much space. There's people maybe going into roles that aren't the best or maybe don't make sense within the context of that time, but were versatile enough to make it work. flamie and s1mple, though, it's just where I start to scratch my head, because, and we can tie this into the next thing that I wanted to bring up now, is that Cold Zera experienced a slight, by his standards, a pretty heavy drop-off in 2018, and then obviously just, like, went off the fucking face of the earth after that. And I think if you look at Cold Zera's play style, like, I mean, you can especially, like, see, like, even as you go on, like, he's still a decent enough CT player, but it was his T-sides that tailed off, because Cold Zera, like it or not, was actually just a bit of a beta. Like, in the same way that, like, people might call Blame F a beta, it's because Cold Zera was primarily trading, and people don't really understand the value of a trade and just think it's baiting because they get baited in their pugs. And it made Cold Zera exceptional. He was ridiculously good at trading. But what we saw later on in his career become a trend, and this wasn't as much a problem with Stewie and Tarek because they were both quite selfless players, is that Cold Zera kind of was shit in a lot of ways without having that kind of selfless player in front of him that he can play off and he can trade off. And I just don't really see flamie ever efficiently becoming that. And then I start to wonder, you know, that thing by itself is why I started questioning, when looking into this episode, when I started questioning, well, maybe Fallen would eventually, maybe not initially, but eventually give up the ult, because they'd realise they would need just that thing going in first for Cold Zera. And maybe, again, if Flamie is doing that and he's not that comfortable, then maybe there's also a language barrier thing there where, it takes that extra second to hear the word go, or, I'm doing this, you do this to trade me. And there's so many things where I actually think, and this is the next question I wanted to ask you, is would coldzera have stopped being coldzera even sooner on the team with s1mple and flamie?
I'm gonna go outright and say like a hard no. I think it's a little bit important to give some context to coldzera's career in order for us to say the things that you just said and justify them to any degree, because I think while partially true, there's a lot that happened between the point of him leaving MIBR and him joining his other teams that would cause him to deteriorate greater than that of him just simply not having somebody that he can bait. We're going to look at the fact that he joins a FaZe clan where they're already in shambles as far as their leadership is considered, as well as their roles are considered in players, and honestly, as far as their trust is probably considered in the future of their team, as it were, because they had made such a big change where they were bringing in player after player and bringing in even Brokey at a point where he was an unknown and unproven entity, not even playing as the AWP player primarily when things started out, mind you. And that's where that's unfortunately another how long would it have been? About like a year and a half, 2 years off coldzera's career after leaving MIBR. And then what does he do after that? He joins Complexity. And that one had to be a major hit to his confidence, where that was just an absolutely terrible situation for him to be in as an individual. And he wasn't there for long, but he takes himself a little bit of a breather and a little bit of a break to reassess going into the new year. And at that point, I mean, we got to also understand that this was already like 4 years ago now. I mean, dude was already like 27, 28 years old. Like, he was already past the prime of his career individually, where he could have been a carry to the degree that you would have wanted him to be in MIBR at that point, right? So if we're going to be talking about the fact that he goes on to FaZe and he plays for a year with a system that's in shambles and he still pulls off a pretty decent LAN rating, in my opinion, as well as individually showing that he still has to kick up a lot of fuss against higher level teams, no, I absolutely don't think that he would have been that bad in a team like this, especially considering the leadership remains stable. So, yeah.
But if it hadn't worked, do you think, like, if the team didn't work, do you think that hit to his confidence would have come sooner, or maybe even the FaZe moves come sooner?
I think the next stage that could have happened in his career, as well as NiKo's, could have been entirely different. I think there could have been a world where NiKo might have tried to make a move to this team at that point, as opposed to maybe a G2 where things might not have been, solidified with Hunter in place just yet. It would have been right in that window of time where it would have made sense for him to maybe try that, as opposed to waiting out for a little longer with FaZe, right?
See, that's interesting, because I actually straight up hadn't considered that. And, the next question I have for you is, even if it had worked, would the allure of coldzera and NiKo, just this rifle partnership that everyone wanted to see at the time for so long, would that have still been too much that coldzera would have said, yeah, it has worked, but I fancy something different in my career. I'm going to go and do this. But yeah, maybe.
Yeah, well, let's timeline it a little bit even further than that if we want to get super nerdy about it. I mean, coldzera was acquired by FaZe in 2019 at the end of it. Hunter was acquired by G2 at the end of 2019. So the time period in where NiKo eventually gets picked up is not for another year by G2 after that. So they get coldzera on FaZe in the end of 2019, right? So there could have been like a time frame where NiKo just wants to straight up join that SK team, and they were probably like, fuck it, let's get him on, right? Or there might have even been a point where they weren't feeling all too confident over at FaZe at that stage, and maybe NiKo's saying to himself, is there any way we can get multiple players over from that other roster that's really making it work to make it happen? But they might have been too good at that time for them to really want to make a move outside of potentially just NiKo. So it could have either A, firewalled it, or if, again, you're talking about the world where they're playing successfully, right? It could have just been firewalled by that, or the fact that they start playing poorly after that move is made. Maybe they reunite a little bit sooner or a little bit later on that team. Maybe there's a world where, goddamn, I don't know, Hunter, NiKo, and coldzera are all playing on the same team for all we know at some point based on the mumbo jumbo.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like this idea that, because as we know, like, FaZe was not great at that point, and coldzera was kind of meant to be the turnaround for them. But maybe you are right. Maybe s1mple and flamie join in early 2018, and they have this initial, like, they win a couple tournaments here and there, but Astralis, they're still good, because Astralis were always going to be good. There is no doubt in my mind that Astralis were always going to work, and maybe, you know, Stewie still ends up on Liquid, and Liquid figure that's part of their game out, and maybe that pushes this team just a little bit further down again. They're like, okay, we need to make a change. And at some point then, maybe it's Fur who departs, maybe it's flamie who departs, and NiKo does come in like that. Again,
I think it's possible. You know, coldzera being in a good place and NiKo not being in such a good place, the inverse of what had eventually happened, you could see it just kind of flip-flopped.
Yeah, because, like, that, you know, that was a big part of why the move to FaZe happened, is because this team, MIBR as they were, hadn't done what they wanted, and coldzera was looking to start winning again.
Imagine coldzera, Fallen, NiKo, s1mple, and flamie.
Do you know what? I would have Fur over flamie. I would, personally.
Well, I mean, that would be a hard ask role-wise, but listen, I mean, I would too. I think the whole reason why s1mple joined the team, if you try to kick him at some point, they'd probably be like, dude, what the hell?
Yeah, I mean, that would be so awful role-wise, but fuck it, you make it work.
On paper, I mean, it's always fun.
Yeah, I mean, do you consider yourself a role cell?
Yeah, I do. I would say pretty. It depends on the day, but pretty typically, I'll be a role cell pretty hard.
Okay, I agree. I'm a big role cell. There's many issues with that, and I also think that's when, you know, that there is another thing about how long this team could have stuck together, because I think roles were obviously always very defined in Counter-Strike, but Astralis, you know, defined them in a very different way, that I think if there was this unnatural element role-wise, that maybe the core of this team with s1mple and flamie sticks together. And by that, I'm maybe not including Fur. I'd say the core is Fallen, coldzera, s1mple. So, how long do you think the 5 players would have potentially stuck together if roles might have got in the way, like I think they would have?
Probably 6 months. I'm thinking 6 months.
You think 6 months maximum, regardless of success?
Well, regardless of success, I'd probably give it as long as Stewie and Tarek had been around, because they already had made a move intermittently between that. I'll give it a fat 9, maybe 9, 2 majors, whichever comes first type deal.
Do you think there's a world where, you know, obviously we all know the year that s1mple had in 2018 and the year he went on to have in 2019. Do you think there's a world where Na'Vi are just like, fuck this, we don't care what the money is, we are buying him back? Because I don't think s1mple would have said no to the move.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a little bit too far beyond the range of we're practically like creating new feelings for them at this point that have never existed. You know what I mean? To really read into it, like this is a new layer of hypothetical to the hypothetical. Is I don't even know. Maybe I don't. The money would have had to have been good. The contract, the buyout clause would have had to have been good. We'll never really know.
What if s1mple? You know, like, he said one of the reasons that he didn't go was that he didn't really like NA the first time around, and they obviously would have been based in NA, and the language barrier. But if we stick on the NA stuff, do you think there would have been a point where the entire team just decided to relocate, would have had to decide to relocate to Europe or lose s1mple? Because I get the feeling of s1mple, like, even now with the context that we've had in the years since this, and like why he initially took his break, which yes had other factors, but I think I see a world where this team, regardless of success, dies because of s1mple simply either needing to move or the team needing to move for him.
Yeah, I think it's entirely possible, considering that most teams probably end up making that move at some point or another anyway. I think like a majority of the teams that go at some point with, again, you were talking about the fact they'd be 3/5 Brazilian. If they ever made that one move towards another European, you know, they might go for that in that way. Or if they got like another American, then we get a little bit into a hazy territory, right? But Yeah, I think that I think the idea was that they wanted to remain predominantly Brazilian for as long as possible, probably 3 out of 5. And seeing where the business model of VRS and at the time like where I think WESG was still going on, where teams might be a little bit enticed to play into that depending on the schedule and the prize pool. Like I think they probably would have stayed somewhere a little bit in the middle ground, perhaps like a little bit more easily accessible to both parties without being too egregious, or at the very least, I think s1mple probably would have had to have bit the bullet at that rate potentially. But again, competitors like Coldzera and Fallen, I'm pretty sure at that rate also would have been willing to do whatever to make it work.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll do a little fun thing to end this in terms of talking about the other players. But there's a final thing on s1mple and flamie. If they had joined SK, do you think the team would have worked? After this discussion, do you think they would have become the actual, the super team that wins?
Comparatively to who?
Any super team you want to name?
Like an Astralis?
Well,
talking like a Vitality. We're talking like I don't think they ever touch Vitality.
Within their era, would they have become the team that this team would have promised on paper?
Yeah, I unfortunately with that 5 don't believe so. Like I said, I think there might have been a little bit of a honeymoon or something of that nature, but I think long term that 5, I don't think so. Unfortunately, I don't think that 5 would have been able to really hang on for all that long outside of like maybe making their obvious like top 4s, top 2s. I don't think they would have been like an Astralis. I don't think they would have ran that year as far as trophies are concerned. Maybe a competitor here and there, like taking 1 or 2, similar to like a Liquid. But again, yeah, like long term, don't really feel it. Short term, potentially. Medium term, you're already kind of making me a little bit sweaty.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think Astralis, that year especially, and even 2019, because most of the times that they weren't winning tournaments, they just fucking weren't at them. It's just like, I don't see a team with how Astralis changed the game being able to consistently topple Astralis. So then it just becomes about, what is success for this hypothetical SK? Is it winning a few tournaments, or is it being the team of the year? And I would say, if they weren't the team of the year, they'd probably all be disappointed after, making the move to sign s1mple and flamie.
Yeah, I mean, it's talking about like the idea that there were players on the table, like we were mentioning initially, like ynoT and Rain, though, too. Like, I mean, this was their first option, ynoT and Shocks, and then second, ynoT and Rain, and then I don't know whether or not it was their pick after that being JW and Crims, or maybe beforehand, or whatever the case. It seems like s1mple and flamie were at least a little higher than them up there before Stewie and Tarek, but I mean, they even wanted Stewie and Automatic initially out the gate, and they didn't end up getting anybody. They just got regular old Stewie and had to wait it out until they could get somebody to pull on over in Tarek, right? So, yeah, I mean, very clearly, even with the success they were able to find with those 2 players that were not bad by any means in the Stewie and Tarek, I think that there's a world where they could start to really grind out that 6-month period I was talking about. But it's, again, do I think that they would have done it and it would have been efficient? I don't really think so. But it's always cool to think about. I mean, thinking about them on stage, it would have been one hell of a story to see, the world's upcoming potential number 1 playing with who was the number 1 of 2016 and 17, and then just rolling into an era where SK/MIBR have that same core with those 2 players carrying over for the first time ever, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to need to research that point. The number 1 players on the same team going back-to-back years, right? Like, that would be insane. Like, that would be an incredible story for that to have been something that had happened. But at least in Global Offensive, I don't believe that that's ever happened before. So,
no, definitely did not. I don't think. I'm
gonna check it just in case, but
well, I mean, it was Get Right, then Olaf, then Cold,
and then Olaf. Yep, nope, didn't happen.
Then s1mple and ZywOo, then Dunk. It still never happened.
Yeah, no, never happened. Would have been cool. Would have been cool.
Do you think it's slightly off top? Do you think it's possible for that to ever happen? Because I'm not sure it is. Unless, like Vitality signed Dunk, I don't think that is possible.
I think we could get a year maybe where, I mean, hypothetically, we get like a Monesi Kiyosuke down the line, or like if Donk ever ends up teaming with one of the two of those guys.
Yeah, I could see a Monesi Donk. I can't see a Monesi Kaisuke.
I'm talking like down the line.
Yeah, maybe. But anyway, let's look at to wrap this up. Let's look at the other options, and we'll quickly go through them and discuss whether we think they would have worked. So, option number 1. Shox and nico. I'm going to say an outright no. I have no idea how that team would have set up efficiently. What's your thoughts?
I'm going to go with a no on that one pretty flat out as well. I think that we kind of got the story as to what the level of Shox was as an individual over time. Role-wise, when he was like role-playing, like in solid, stable positions like he was in later Vitalities, a little bit more passive, playing more anchory. Like that was a point where I felt like he'd really filled his place in a team. And then when he tried to break away from that a little bit more over in Liquid, it just didn't really even look to remotely be the same with role overlap. And if there's any sort of role overlap at this time, it would have been hard to see him relinquishing a lot of his responsibilities from where he was frying on G2. So I'm going to say no.
Okay. So this is the one I think you were alluding to earlier, because it's the one I actually see having a greater chance of success than s1mple and flamie. nico and Rain. I think that would work, and I think that actually would have, like, seriously worked. Like, I think this team maybe could have even made the adaptation to Astralis, and maybe could have even been the team that, prevented Astralis from establishing an era.
And that is?
With nico and Rain.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you actually say the names. I thought you were doing like a drum roll. Yeah, no.
No.
nico and Rain, dude. Dude, throw Rain to the fire, man. Like, just get him in there. If he really wants to just run in and find you some entries with a good setup, I can't really foresee there being a world where Cleanup Crew and Fallen, Fallen, even screw it. Fallen, Cold, and nico as his follow-ups, like, can't be able to trade him effectively. There's going to be no lacking of communication in the background for them to be able to try and fix any of their issues, because they're always going to be at their hardest and trying to play at 110%. Their competitors, like, down to the wire, right? And Rain is a guy who's got that level of stoicism that maybe flamie and Crims might be able to bring to the table to a similar degree. But I think, like, if we're talking, like, role plus personality, like, plus just raw skill ceiling, dude, just absolute mechanics in that guy. And his ability to keep it, like, longevity in similar roles, if not the same roles, even though he had intermittent slumps for the next, what would have been 7 years or so. Like, yeah, easily, hands down, I feel like that one could have been something to watch, and I think that would have been probably the most exciting for me in terms of my expectations out the gate reasonably, not just on paper.
Yeah, I think that's the team with the... Yeah, I think in terms of that potential for success that we were talking about earlier with s1mple and flamie, I think the nico and Rain one role-wise, especially because it means there's never this constant battle of like, fucking hell, Fallen's had a bad couple of tournaments with the Orc, maybe we give that to s1mple, and they start testing that and getting distracted by that. Like, I think the potential with nico and Rain is maybe even slightly higher, and I also think the gap to Dud is so much smaller. Like, I could agree with that. I actually think that there's kind of no way that team actually fails. Like, really, like, yes, you've still got the cultural issues.
I feel like they would have to get something done. Like, there would have to be some major milestone victory, if not, like, more. Like, just has to be.
Like, you've still got those cultural issues, potentially. But, like, I think the cultural issues wouldn't have been anywhere near what they were with... what they potentially would have been with s1mple and flamie. And
sure.
I just think, like, nico was so good at this point. Like, Rain was underrated at this point and was willing to be that guy that was just going to be selfless and not really care. I'm not sure who would have given up all their space on CT sides and being that fucking small site anchor bitch player.
Probably would have been Rain, maybe. I don't know.
It feels
I can't imagine
like
Rain being able to do that.
It feels like it would be Rain. But yeah,
he'd be fine in it. I don't think he would have been bad at that point in his career.
No, absolutely. And honestly, I just don't see a world where that team would have failed. But what I do see a world of where it would have failed is Crimson JW. Because that's one I really don't get. Like, earlier when I said that I saw the greatest potential of success is s1mple AWPing, but I thought Fallen would be the AWPing. I see, like, a very small chance of success if JW AWPs, and just 0 chance of success if JW doesn't AWP, and it's JW and Crims. Like, I don't see how that could ever have actually... Like, I think that wouldn't have even, reached the heights of Stewie.
It felt delusional. That one felt a little delusional. I don't really think that one ever really had any legs to it outside of them just being storied players in the scene that maybe Cold or Fallen would have wanted to have worked with at that point in time, maybe. Other than that, like, it just... Even Crims didn't really make a whole hell of a lot of sense to me. Like, his shift in positions wouldn't have been, like, that drastic, but, like, again, the clash between him and Cold Zera as players that kind of require a little bit of... I wouldn't even say bait, but, like, distance from their players. Like, somebody's going to need to get on JW's ass. And in my world, in my brain, in the conversation we had before about synergy, it would have to be Crims, kind of, sort of, to be able to get that refrag onto the second. But, like, that just wastes so much of what that guy was capable at that point. Where, even looking at the fact that they were able to make some pretty decent waves after that, that Fnatic team with Crims even in hand still, right? Like, I don't know. It would have been weird to see him be the one where I can only imagine is changing his game style so drastically. And I have a feeling that conversation was dead in the water pretty quickly for one reason or another, whether it be the fact that JW wasn't AWPing or that Crims wasn't getting his spots or that Cold wasn't getting his spots. It just didn't really seem to make sense and mesh, especially if, something a little bit more reasonable on the table of Stewie and Tarek was, or I guess Stewie and Automatic and then eventually Tarek was something that they could even talk about.
Yeah, and that does lead into what the final pair that was rumoured before s1mple and flamie, which was s1mple and Crims, where, again, like, I think, okay, you're adding in one more culture, you're taking away one Eastern European player out and bringing in a Scandinavian player, and I kind of like that aspect, but everything you said about the roles is just like, okay, like I know Rain will do the selfless thing, and I think flamie would also do it if he had to. Why would you, like, who are you making do it out of the remaining players if s1mple and Crims join? Like, it just doesn't work. So, as a final thing to round off the what if.
Sure.
s1mple and flamie to SK. Do you wish it happened, or are you happy with the timeline that we got?
I am very happy with the timeline that we got, because I don't think s1mple would have seen a major, maybe at all, if it had gone over. So
interesting. I think it'd have still won a major, but yeah, I'm happy with the timeline we got.
The circumstances of him winning a major would have had to have been crazy. Like, he would have never had his bit. He wouldn't have had Electronic. He wouldn't have had Boomich. He would have had to quite literally have just kind of bummed his career off being a star opper who was quote unquote toxic, jumping from team to international team and hoping it worked. And I don't know if there were any international teams at that time that would have been able to foster him outside of FaZe.
Well, that is true. I'm not sure if they would have got Boomich, because I think Zeus would have stuck around on Na'Vi longer than he did. But I think in the world where this happened, s1mple would have been back on Na'Vi within 18 months, to be honest.
Sure, if that's what your timeline is, then yeah, sure.
Yeah. I think that would have happened. But you know what? In those 18 months, little old me was an Astralis fan, so I had a fucking great time. Nothing disrupted that.
I'm glad.
So I'm happy with the timeline that we got. So I think with that, to close out the show, is there anything that you would like to plug before we depart?
Yeah, I mean, if you guys are interested in content like this video in particular, as well as the idea that you might want to explore a little bit of Counter-Strike nostalgia in time to come, you can feel free to follow me over on my YouTube channel over at ynoT CS2. Is that my YouTube channel? It might be ynoT FPS01 if I'm bumming out. Okay, the actual @ is ynoT FPS01, but the name is ynoT CS2. If you want to go and check things out over there, you definitely can. I've got a couple of interviews if you're curious about some of the players and coaches that I got the chance to talk to with a good friend of mine, Quacka. Pardon. And other than that, you can connect with me on Twitter over at ynoT CS2. And if you want to, catch my shitty takes or catch a commentary or two, feel free.
Awesome. Well, with that, he's been ynoT. I've been Sam. Producer Charlie is also here, and Jack made a thumbnail.
Producer Charlie.
So we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.